Every day, you essentially pay your dues by doing the harder thing when it's the right thing to do. Hey everyone, welcome to this podcast. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you are doing well. This is Dave from Shift, CEO of Shift, and solo on this podcast today because I'm actually kind of excited to do a podcast that's been requested quite a bit. And I felt like now was the right time to kind of do it, kind of as people are looking for some guidance in these areas. But people may know, it's not a shocker, right? When I film the podcast that I am a absolutely massive dork and I read a lot of books. There's a pile down here. You can see I ran out of bookshelf space and there's some on the floor there. But there's some more over here. I'm noticing this is a problem. But essentially I love just reading a lot of nonfiction, personal development and business books and kind of leadership books, but also just culture development books, psychology books. And the reason I do that is multiple. One is because I'm always trying to find some things that will help me feel better, perform better, improve the way my life is kind of going day to day. But just working with a lot of gymnasts and with a lot of athletes and just being in the medical clinic as well, I find that the things that are typically helpful for me, I can use as nice pieces of wisdom to help the other athletes that I'm working with or other friends of mine and stuff like that. So I've always had this episode on the back burner of an idea I've wanted to do, but I've never really had the time to do it. And then just lately, I've had just a crazy amount of DMs and emails from people saying, we're doing some new stuff in our gym. We're giving coaches a book and we're going to read it and talk about it, which is dope as a book club. It's a great idea for your gym if you want to do that. But people who are just looking for ideas of books that are impactful from a cultural point of view or a personal development point of view or some sort of, new idea point of view of leadership or something like that, or books about helping work with athletes a little bit more, fluidly and make sure they feel okay about things. So yeah, I always thought I wanted to do this podcast. And I guess now with so many people asking, I figured it was a good time. And it's cool because it seems as though a lot of people are opening up to try to learn more and try to think about their own personal life as a coach or as a parent or as a teammate or a friend. I know a lot of college teams that I consult with, this idea of doing a book club is really cool. Well, they'll read, maybe like a short fiction book per every 2 months or so, because it's obviously college kids are busy, but they'll talk about the lessons they're learning, or they'll bring quotes to practice and put them on the whiteboard, or they'll rotate someone to read a couple pages and share what that means to them. And it's just such a cool way to build culture. And I also know of a couple gyms where the coaching staff will maybe read a book and talk about it and share through a book club or text message about what they can pull from it, what they want to try, whether it's a medical book and a more of like a sports science book, or it's more of a personal development book or a leadership book. And they find extraordinary benefits for their own personal life, as well as, the gym culture that they're working on and this team that they're working with. So yeah, all the books that I have, there's 5 books I'm going to go through here that I feel like people in gymnastics would really benefit from reading. And now that I look at them, I think I've probably read each of them like at least 3 times. I mean, read like cover to cover. I like crawl through books and I really stop and think about, what this section means, or like I journal on certain passages. So sometimes I when I listen to podcasts, I listen very fast and get the information, but I like going slow with books and really like pulling out what I think it resonates with and kind of doing some open-ended responses on it. So I personally do it with like a Moleskine journal and just write by it. I try to get a couple hours, throughout the week. But I've probably read all of these at least 3 times. And they've made a significant impact on my life, my happiness levels, my thought process, my critical thinking, the way I view relationships and coaching together. But also there've been books that I've gifted to like 15 people, right? Like all these books have been multiple Christmas presents, multiple, donations to we had a public book library at our gym, which was just like, I brought in a bunch of books and people could take them and read them. When they were done, they would sign them and put them back on the shelf and somebody else would take them. So that public library thing was really cool. I suggest people doing that. But yeah, I just want to go through these 5 books and hopefully encourage people to read them or others like them, and kind of just share, what are some of the key themes that I felt were really useful. And this will be a shorter podcast because I know I'm trying to balance out some of the hour to 2 hour long ones that are just so, sometimes really depth, right? Hopefully not painfully long for people, but just really in depth. So yeah, we'll start off with this and we'll just kind of share them. And then obviously we'll link a lot of these in the show notes. And I would really love to hear people's feedback about whether they have, other books to recommend, because I'm always in the list, but also like if these books also were useful and what they got out of these books, because it's cool to kind of start a conversation on it. So, all right. So first one here is going to be Good People by Anthony Chajan. I hope the podcast mirroring thing is not going on. But this book has gotten some wear, and look at the coffee on it, right? But this book is a phenomenal, it kind of is a business leadership book. But what they really do is they go through within a company and a hierarchy and some other pointers. They point out the characteristics of like people who are just truly phenomenally good people and have done impressive good deeds in the world, right? So whether it's presidents or doctors or CEOs of companies of like large philanthropies, what makes people that are viewed as extremely good people, what makes them them, right? And they go all the way through different things versus like, their wholeness, right? Their ability to be well-rounded and their ability to connect with people, or their ability to endure through really hard times, their ability to, see the back and forth between, okay, when is this a time I have to push through and be gritty versus when is a time I'm just going to kind of like accept that maybe this situation needs to be rethought, right? And I just find that there's so many things that are really valuable and characteristics they talk about. Another one that they really talk about a lot is those who value and seek out mentorship. So what are the practices that people do to really be viewed as exceptionally, what they call cornerstone people in their lives? And so the reason I like this book is, one is it kind of like gave me a lot of ideas for things that I find very valuable. And when I found this book, I was like in my early 20s, and I was going through a phase where I was like, I'm not super proud of the lifestyle that I'm leading in terms of like my habits and my food and my, the amount I was going out and drinking and stuff like that. And so I found a lot of like, really, really good values to anchor myself in, which I'd always felt that I knew were important, but this really confirmed that like, okay, these are the things that I want to live my life by, right? This is the moral scaffolding that I feel as though is important to me. Not everything, but a lot of things in here which I really valued, like work ethic and kindness and empathy and humility, things that I hope I translate to my relationships and my day-to-day life, but also what I do with my work and what I do with my time. A lot of them came from this book, and just reflecting on some of the people that I view as extremely impressive, and things that are very, very useful to have. So yeah, a lot of stuff in here, compassion, humility, all that kind of stuff. But this book was the first book for me that really made me think about what I stand for. And it really made me think about what do I want out of my life in a holistic point of view, which I know is very, very, esoteric and broad picture. But I believe that a lot of the choices you make day to day, whether they're good or they're not so good and healthy or not so healthy, a lot of them rest on what your core values are and what your virtues are and what you really believe in. And so for a lot of people who maybe view me as hardworking or whatever, like I wasn't born that way, and I definitely screwed a lot up. You know what I mean? Like I had to go through some really rough times to get to the point where I felt as though I'm in a place where I'm doing things that I believe are great for myself and for those around me. But this was one of the most important books. So the first one here, just to kind of recap, is Good People by Anthony Shawn. And most of these books are all like, 15, 20 bucks. They're not certainly encyclopedias that are going to break your bank account. So yeah, that one is very, very good. I've gifted a lot of people. The second one here is very different in terms of the ideas here, but in terms of like the best non-coaching coaching book I've ever read, is this book is called Helping People Change. It's by, one of them is Smith. So that's good. Van Oosten, Smith, and Boyatzis. I'll put hopefully the links up everywhere, but flip it this way. So this book is amazing. So any coach out there or someone who just has family members or, friends that, they want to help change their lifestyle or they want to help change their habits, right? Like I found this book when I was going through a phase at our gym where I was very frustrated with motivation and a little bit lack of work ethic and some goals that were just not really being pushed for. And this isn't like we had a culture problem that was brutal. It was more that it just seemed as though we made a lot of progress, but still there were some people who were just not wanting to put in the work or be motivated, and it was dragging our practices down. So I would spend all this time setting up drills and nobody would do it. Or I would spend all this time researching stuff and trying to really put together a good strength plan, and everyone just kind of like go through the motions and not really do it. And it was really frustrating for me because I knew that they wanted to be successful, but I couldn't quite find the right things to say or the gears to turn or the switches to pull on to get someone to be motivated to want to change themselves, which is ultimately how people really stick long-term in a lifestyle habit. Like anyone knows, if someone tells you to change something that you're doing wrong, you're less apt to do it versus you realize yourself that it's something you want to work on and you're motivated for some goal you have. And so these researchers are from Northwestern, I believe. And essentially what they did is they analyzed, what were the types of motivational habits that make people change long term, whether it was like, quitting smoking or lifestyle changes like health and exercise or work ethic or things like that. What were the things that really make them change their lifestyle and their choices for the better for the long term? So like 3+ months, which anyone who's tried to change a habit or do something new is very hard to stick to. And they tried to analyze from a neuroscience point of view, what were the things that were more correlated to people with long-term changing of their habits versus those who kind of like started and fell off the wagon, like a classic New Year's resolution. And so what was cool about this, what they found is that when you approach things from more of like an offensive point of view, right? So let's use a gymnastics example. So everyone, you're not doing the drills and you're being a little bit, disrespectful right now and not motivated. I need you to change. I need you to, fix your attitudes and let's really try to get back here. So you're not yelling at someone, but you're just really like coming at them pretty hard. You know what I mean? And what they found is that when people feel as though they're kind of getting told what to do and they're getting kind of attacked for it, it automatically activates the sympathetic nervous system, that fight or flight response, and it draws up their adrenaline, draws up their defensive, posturing, whether it's mentally or physically, and they're less receptive to hear what you're saying and actually accept that that's something they should do. So it doesn't really stick and it's not as resonant for them to really make true change. Now, that is confirmed with MRIs they looked at, and they actually saw that those people who had that approach, they were less likely to actually change their habits in the first place and maintain those changes long term. Now, that was in contrast to what their book was very, very helpful to realize is that instead, if you take an approach where you ask that person, what do you want out of this? What are your goals? Why are you doing this? Right. And in gymnastics, I found this to be very eye-opening, which is I would just ask the girls instead of kind of like barking at them. If things boiled over a little bit, I would talk to one or two or sit the group down and be like, listen, why are you here? Why are you in gymnastics? Why are you coming 20 hours per week? And everyone's different, right? Some people say, I want to have fun with my friends. Some people say, I want to stay healthy. Some people say, I want to get this skill. Some people say, I want to move up in level. Some people say, I want to never compete again, but just have fun doing fun gymnastics. Some people say, I want to get a college scholarship, right? Everyone's goals are highly variable. But when you put the ball in their court and you have like an empathetic point of view, which is what do you want out of this, right? And they tell you, I want to flip a Yurchenko. I want to go to level 8 and I want to flip this Yurchenko, right? And you say, okay, well, right now, your behavior, right? Chalk bucket, not doing the drills, kind of goofing off. That is certainly not in line with the goals that you told me that you have and that I'm trying to help you reach. So you're painting a picture for them of why what their behavior is not really correlated or in line with what their goals are. Now, that obviously rides in the fact that they're honest about their goals and they're not lying. But if you truly are getting to the point where they're being honest about like, no, I want to flip this Yurchenko. It really matters to me. You say, okay, well, here's what we're going to do. We are going to make a plan, a map of how the Yurchenko here comes back to doing drills that help you with the issues you have, getting your arm swing, getting your block, watching where your vision is, right? And that goes backwards one step of why all those boring drills and those basics and those shaping things that you really don't want to do, those things are going to help those drills, which help that skill, which help you move up in level. And then lastly, down here, the strength and conditioning and all the flexibility and all the prehab, right? That stuff all is what allows you to get into those proper shapes, which allows you to have your Yurchenko, which allows you to move up in level and score well if you work at it. And then all the way back down to, and the ability to focus and thoughtfully think about what you're doing and be really, really dialed in for these 45 minutes on vault every day that we do it, as hard as it is. And we can have fun, that's fine. That is what determines the quality of that strength, the quality of that prehab, the quality of those drills. And that is what safely gets you to do your Chenkos. So you essentially paint the story arc of, okay, you told me your goal was blank. Here are the dots that reverse engineer to that, and why, even though it's not the most fun thing in the world, doing step A, that's boring and not that exciting, will give you the step B, which will give you the step C, which is close to your goal, which will then hopefully give you your goal in the long run. And so when I read that book, it really changed my perspective on how to talk to athletes about changing the way they work out, or changing their motivation, or changing their work ethic with drills, or changing their commitment to practice, right? Because it was no longer about Dave telling them what to do to make Dave happy. It was about me suggesting to them the best way forward, and that they trusted my expertise as a coach or a medical provider or whatever to do those things properly, right? And I think really, it didn't change everybody. I'm not going to lie to you and say we had like a hallelujah moment, but a vast majority of the things that I really struggled with motivation and, goal setting and showing up to practice and doing strength and all the not so awesome stuff that's not so great with flexibility and grunt work. A lot of that stuff was a lot more accomplished because of that perspective of sitting down and saying, what do you want? And how can I help you? And that book shows with fMRI research that when people are approached in that way, it activated their parasympathetic nervous system more, which is the calmer kind of rest and digest, which allowed them to absorb information and hear why it was important. And they kind of had the locus of control, the feeling that they were doing it for themselves was more prone to be there, right? And that's really, really cool because when that person, again, realizes I'm doing this for myself and my goals that I want, they're much more open to even hear what you're saying, but also change their behavior and stick to that behavior change when the going gets tough. So I highly suggest that book, and I'll show it again, which is Helping People Change. Again, it's by Boyatzis, Smith, and Van Oosten. I'm sorry to that author. I apologize in advance. But yeah, that is a phenomenal book, and we'll put these on the show notes. But very, very underrated coaching book, in my opinion. All right, next one. I read a lot of books on psychology, personal development, and particularly mental health, because I have struggled with some mental health problems related to depression, anxiety, burnout, you name it, in my younger 20s. And so for a long time, I was just absolutely just tearing through books on mental health and psychology and CBT, and going to therapy was the best thing that I did. But this book was one of the most eye-opening books I've ever read on the topic of these things that so many people deal with. It's called Lost Connections by Joseph Harari. Okay, so Joseph Harari. And so what this book is he's a journalist who essentially struggled with a lot of depression himself. He's from the UK. And he got to the point where he was put on a heavy dose of antidepressants. I forget exactly what drug it was, but the drug he was on gave him enormous side effects of weight gain and sleeping issues and grogginess, and it really ran him down. So he was motivated that he did get better temporarily, but then he got much worse and kind of relapsed back into being very, very depressed. So what he did was he kind of set out on a journey to talk with the world-leading experts on depression and loneliness and anxiety, and try to get to the bottom of like, why do people struggle with why do people really struggle with this? And if I can just understand what the root causes are, I can reverse engineer those things for me and maybe get off my medication. And it's just an absolutely fascinating look into some of the things that I think people overlook with depression. And so I think that for me, when I was reading this book, it was in a coaching phase when I was very, very overworked and I was very, very burnt out. And so I was kind of like using work, and I was using a lot of other like unhealthy coping mechanisms, like working too much, or going out with friends too much and kind of living a partier lifestyle or whatever. I was doing things to kind of cover up the fact that I maybe had some mental health problems. And in this book, what he really talks about is the role of meaning and purpose and social connection, and having a sense of a place for you in what you're doing in the world. And so obviously his approach, and what there is some merit to this, but when he was having his problems, essentially his doctor said, it's all in your head. You have a chemical imbalance with the chemicals in your brain. If we take these drugs, it will fix the chemical imbalance and you will feel better. Okay. So while it did treat the outward expression of his symptoms, which was the chemical imbalance, the cause of his problems and many people's problems, he argues, is that they actually struggle with a lack of purpose and a lack of meaning. They don't have really high quality social connections. They don't have something they really love to do as a passion. And they feel like they're on their own. They feel like there's no hope, and they're isolated, and they don't have that social connection or that hobby or that meaning or that purpose that is really driving them forward to feel as though it's worth continuing to do. Okay. They just feel like hollow inside. Like a lot of the times that he talks about it, references people are just empty inside. They're just gray, they're just a ghost inside. And I think that this book was a really, really big eye opener for me. He has a phenomenal TED talk too, as well, but a really, really good eye opener to how other cultures in some places have dealt with pretty serious, situations of depression or loneliness in people with non-pharmacological means by any way, shape, or mean. And the best example he gives in the book is he went to this village and he talked with a group of villagers about, like, have you ever had anyone who's depressed, right? Very like non-Western medicine philosophy. And they're like, oh yeah, we have people who are really lonely and really depressed. He goes, oh, what do you give them for an antidepressant? And one person said, oh, we give them a cow. And he's like, a cow. What? He's like, oh yeah, let me tell you the story. So there was a farmer who was in the rice field. He loved his job. He would farm rice. He would make food. He would supply his family. He loved his family. And then he stepped on a mine in the rice field, and it blew his leg off, and he was an amputee. So he could no longer go in the rice field because he was healing. And when he had that, amputation go on, it wasn't the leg loss that caused his loneliness and depression. He no longer could do his routine with his work and his family and his life. And that combination that he argues in his book, the combination of a loss of purpose and then also the loss of the ability to do what he felt was meaning and purpose, provide for his family and cook and do things around. He was no longer able to do that and provide for himself, his family, and his village. So he fell into a depression. So what they did is, instead of obviously, walking and mining the field while he was healing, they bought him a cow that he could take care of and milk and provide stuff for his family and his town. And it instantly reversed his depression, because he didn't have the exact same thing that he was doing, but he felt as though he was taking care of the cow. He was milking it. He was providing resources for his family and for his village. He felt as though his meaning and his purpose was restored, right? And I think the analogy and the takeaway that we have kind of in our world is, whether it's gymnastics or whether it's whatever else it is, you really need to connect with why you are coaching gymnastics. Why are you in gymnastics? Why do you have your son or daughter in gymnastics? What do you love about the sport? Because if it is about money and fame and stuff, it's not going to go well, right? If your sense of meaning and purpose and validation is to impress other people and get claps and get Instagram likes and TikTok likes and all that kind of stuff, that's a dark place, man. It's a dark place. And I've been down a little bit of that road, which was, I was insecure and I was trying to do everything for everybody else's clapping and all their approval and the money and the status and the traveling and the talking at the bar after the meet about how great the girls were and all that kind of stuff. And I was anchoring my self-esteem in things outside my control that were very unhealthy. Another really good podcast in conjunction with this is Laurie Santos has a podcast. She's a researcher at Yale. I think it's called the Happy Lab. And she talks about, the research of happiness and what truly makes people happy versus what people think makes them happy. And spoiler alert, when you look at people who make a lot of money or win the lottery or, have a phenomenal job or they have a huge house or a nice car or all these material things, when they get those things, it settles down to a normal level, and then they want something else. Versus when people can focus more on meaning, purpose, doing good in the world, their passions, their hobbies, the things they love to do. Those are the things that typically bring them much more long-standing joy, and the ability to, push through adversity and work hard and do things you believe in and take care of yourself, even though it's challenging. So yeah, that book I cannot recommend enough for anybody for understanding not only your own maybe mental health situations, but also maybe why a gymnast might struggle if they get injured. They're set away from their gym. They can't go to practice anymore. They can't compete. They love competing, but they can't, and they lose that sense of self that they love gymnastics. This book really helps to kind of wrap your head around it, and it also helps you think more about, okay, I need to keep the athletes involved who are injured, or get working with a sports psychologist, or try to really understand where these sources of maybe anxiety are coming from for my athletes and those that I work with. Whether it's disappointment or fear of letting people down or social pressures. Social pressure in a younger athlete is really a big one too, because they're kind of learning their social group. They want to have friends and do that. So sometimes the social pressure and some of the fear of judgment from other people is pretty brutal. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's a phenomenal book. All right, so last two here. So this one, man, look at how much wear this book has. I've just destroyed this book. Look at my highlighting. I just go so hard on some of these books that I love. This book is a little bit heavier of a read in terms of some of the profiles they document, but it's called The Road to Character by David Brooks. And what's the way to say it? The hit, like the face value hit of this book for me was the very beginning when he talks about two different, it's called Adam 1 and Adam 2. And he essentially outlines, the story about, there's two Adams, and one Adam is about what I kind of just talked about, which is like the outward facing appearance of what you're like, what you look like, how attractive you are, how much money you make, how much stuff you have, what your job title is, kind of like the external pressure and the external impressiveness of, showing off what maybe a capitalistic American society would show you is all the things you think you need to be impressive and be happy. And so he contrasts that versus Adam 2, which is more like your true core virtues of, are you a good person? And do you work hard? And are you nice to people? And do you genuinely care about other people? And do you do good in the world? And that kind of source of what you look like on paper, right, versus what you actually are like, was very impactful to me. I found this book at a time when I was starting to realize that I wasn't really proud of the lifestyle that I was leading, and I was doing things for the wrong reasons. Like I just said, I was doing it for the money and the fame and the status and the look at the blog posts and look at the traveling and look at all these people paying me, right? I was doing it all for the clapping of other people, all for the validation of other people. And it was making me feel darker and darker and darker, right? And I started to really struggle with self-esteem in my middle 20s because I was doing it for everyone else's approval. And when you're doing it for everyone else's approval, you're extremely vulnerable to somebody not approving of you and it hurting you. But also, it's never enough. There's never enough money. There's never enough, 10-0 scores or winning the meets, or there's never a nicer car. There's never a bigger house. There's always more. So you're never really truly satisfied. Versus what this book does is it goes through a lot of profiles of very significant people in society who have come up with incredibly difficult things to do or accomplishments they've had. And he essentially walks through and profiles those about what makes those central core virtues so valuable, right? What makes resilience so important? And what are the people that have done that? What makes self-mastery and ruthless dedication to self-improvement so important, right? What makes these things so valuable, similar to good people? Like what makes these characteristics so chaseable, or people pursue them so much, so desirable? Because they really chronicle hard things, right? They're the ability to constantly be in self-mastery and constantly have a very high sense of self and dignity, and stand on your morals and stand on your spine and really stand up for what you believe in, is extremely hard to do in our modern society. So there's there's a lot of really good profiles in here, but like I said, it's heavier. Like for example, one of the profiles they do is the pediatric oncologist who discovered the cure for bone marrow transplant. So the first person to realize that what had to be done to save these kids was to harvest their bone marrow and use those to treat their blood cancers, which, I mean, I was struggling to get through some of these chapters. They're heavy, right? But like, to think about what that person has to go through to get through that in their head, and then follow the science against everybody else saying you are absolutely a maniac and this is ruthlessly cruel and evil and you're going to kill people and their kids. But the ability to really see why it was valuable and stick to your laurels with all the science and other people around you. He invented the cure for a lot of, serious bone disorders that save thousands of kids' lives now. But anybody who knows, bone marrow transplants are horrific, right? They're horrific, and the thought of doing it on a kid is even worse. But they really go through a lot of these characteristics that, having resolve like that, and having morals and standing up for what you either believe in or is right. I also read that at a time, for many people who may know, that in the US, we are going through a horrific scandal, right? Just the worst of the worst possible thing imaginable that made me a combination of furious and sad and upset. And at that time, Shift was becoming a little more popular, and I had to stick to my guns a little bit in terms of what I believed was right and who I wanted to associate myself with and who I wanted to stop associating myself with, and the things that I believed in 2013, 14, 15 that were starting to come to light now. And people are like, wow, wait a minute, this culture change thing is pretty important. This self-reflection, this self-development is really important. So I was in this weird hurricane of going through this process myself, but also talking about what I thought really needed to change within gymnastics culture, as many other people were. And it just gave me a lot of interesting thought prompts on, sticking up for what you believe in and having a spine and trying to have a really strong moral fabric, and, living what I call virtues over vices, which is trying to really live in a virtue moral, ethical framework, and not just kind of like, a vice led, whether it's numbing with alcohol or social media or spending money on stuff or all that kind of stuff. Some of these books really hit hard for me. And that's why I've read them so many times, because I'll buy a fresh one and go back and re-highlight it, recolor it, and listen to it again on a run or something like that. So yeah, I really firmly believe that that's another one that a lot of people should read. And so, all right, last one on the list. Definitely the most impactful book in my career. I actually have 3 pages of the book hanging on my desk right in front of my, or at my wall in front of my desk right here, that I read it like all the time. And this is Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday. So my boss, Mike Ronald, my good friend Mike Ronald, gave me this book in 2015 when I started working at Champion Physical Therapy. And now that I look back on it, I'm not sure if he was telling me that I had an ego or the book just came out and he wanted to give it to me. But Yeah, anyone familiar with Ryan Holiday's work knows that it's very direct and punchy and sharp. And what I mean by that is it really hits hard messages very, very well. And so again, this was the exact same time in my life that I was realizing slowly that one, I had a massive ego, coaching in my personal life, and a lot of the problems that I was blaming other people for were my fault. But also when I was really, really realizing that I'm not happy with the lifestyle I'm leading, I'm not happy with who I am as a not like a human, but like the choices that I'm making. And so this book goes through and it chronicles the perils and the risks of ego. So they have three sections: the danger of having an ego when you're kind of ascending to a successful point in your life, where you're accomplishing a goal, or like what can be the hubris effect if you know Icarus, the story, if you fly too close to the sun. They study the effect of ego on the way up. And then they study the effect of what happens when you are successful and you do complete your goal. And now you're trying to maintain that high level performance of what ego can do. And they document, for example, like the fall of epically large companies that they got too high on their own supply, got into a very egotistical point and stopped doing the groundwork and the trench work, and the company fell apart from underneath them. So they talk about ego on the way up, they talk about ego on a plateau, and then they also talk about what happens when maybe you have a downfall and you kind of fall from grace, of what in that moment of needing self-reflection and accountability, if you're egotistical in that point and you're delusional that it's not my fault, I didn't cause this, that was the other people who caused the company to fall apart, the other people caused the girls to do bad to me, the boys are just reckless, it's their fault. If you're just pointing, and you have no ability to be humble here and kind of eat your own words sometimes, the dangers of that are that you'll never be able to actually recover and learn from that. So they use a ton of really good examples of history and Roman philosophy and sorts of other real life events that contrast between those that were able to maintain humility at all points, be successful, be driven, have expectations of themselves and have guidelines and goals, but not be so delusionally egotistical that it blows up in their face. And so, yeah, I was definitely eating my own words when I read some of this, and it hit real close to home. And so I had to break it up into small parts, because I would go through sections and be like, damn, that's me. You know what I mean? Like I am definitely the problem at my gym. I am the egotistical one. I'm the one who's not listening to other people's opinions. I'm the one who's shutting down people's ideas. And, I think I'm so smart because I have a doctorate and whatever. And so, yeah, I read this one in like 2015, and it was very, very influential on my life. And it's also like a really short read. It's like a very quick, short chapter book. So you can read one or two chapters like in a 15-minute morning, and just kind of sit on the idea. And listening to Ryan do these on audiobook was really cool too. I read it and then I listened to it while I was running, and I would like listen to a couple chapters, throughout the run. And yeah, that was really cool too, because it just hits different when the author is talking about it. I don't think all these books have the author reading their own narrative, which I'm a big stickler for that. Like a book that's really good on audiobook has to have the author, because they can explain and enunciate and really drive home the points they think are important. So yeah, that is number one. And then there is a bonus section here, because I could not obviously pick one, but I am a firm believer in gymnastics that you have to be willing to look at all the hard things in order to reflect on yourself and others and make improvements. So these books are not one book, but these are pretty much all the books that I've read. And I might have missed one or two, so I apologize. But these are all the books that cover the essentially like the scandal and the fallout that happened with Larry Nassar abuse scandal and everything horrific that happened in the sport that we love and I love. I was having a really hard time reading these. Like when I say a really hard time, so we have What Is a Girl's Worth by oh my god, Don Hollander. I'm forgetting her name, Rachel Don Hollander. The Girls, Abused, Make It Happen, Chalked Up, and Start by Believing. Kyle Schufa's book is more of like an autobiography, but it does talk about some of those practices. But essentially, these are all the books that people have written, and there's a couple more on the shelf probably that are about their experiences in gymnastics during some of the darkest times that our sport has recorded, and that we all know have come to light now. But when they were coming out, it's like, man, they were hard to read. They really were. Like between documentaries and those, it was tough to get through for me. And I think it was important though that I read those, because I had to be willing and able to see the darkest corners of what was going on in order to really understand and empathize with people and see their point of view and see the brutality of what actually happened in some of those situations. Because how in the world can you try to make change and make a positive example to fix things and hold people accountable if you don't actually have a recollection of what really happened? So all those books, I think, just deserved their own spot, kind of in a similar number one category, because they're just so important for gymnastics. So I would highly recommend that people with appropriate, maybe professional guidance for some people if they need that, or with the guidance of a therapist or someone if it's really hitting home for you. Obviously, don't read it if it's triggering for you or it really is too close to home. But yeah, those books were all extremely important for me to read. As they came out. I think it was like 15, 16, 17, 18. They all kind of came out in those 3 years. So I would highly encourage people to do those as well. So you can't turn a blind eye to it. You got to address it right on. But yeah. So wanted to end with those, and hopefully that helps people. We'll definitely include show notes and links to all this kind of stuff. But I would definitely pick one. Pick one. I think if you want to kind of, one resonates with you or you feel like it might hit better, check out some of those and just 15 minutes, 20 minutes a day, start your day with it. I like to read in the morning or kind of on a Saturday afternoon when I have like a lot of calm time. I can just journal and get a cup of coffee and just chill a little bit. But those books have significantly changed my life, like for the better. And I think a lot of people maybe notice the way that I am on the podcast or how I, interact with people. And a lot of that came from not being happy with where I was in my 20s and reading a lot of books and changing a lot of things and going to therapy and then coming on this side now. And so constant work in progress, a lot more work to be done here. And I hope I find 49 more books that change me for the better and keep doing it. But for now, I think those are probably, that top shelf right there is all my top shelf books. I was having a really tough time. It took like 15 minutes before this podcast to finally pick the last ones. But yeah, these 5 will do for now. So yeah, hope everyone liked that. If you are interested in more of this kind of stuff, we can totally do it. When these episodes are coming out, we have a lot of cultural discussions happening around the podcast and stuff like that. And of course, we have the symposium, which is coming up in June, which has so many good cultural hard hitters that we're talking about, some really awesome things that are changing for the better, since 2016, it's 2023 now. So we are seeing monstrously good change. So if you're anyone in gymnastics, medical provider, coaching, strength and conditioning, and you want to get involved, the symposium is just jam packed with just so many good technical lectures and culture conversations and just really, really cool groups of people. It's growing exponentially, which is beyond my wildest dreams. But it's really cool to see. So if you're interested in that, you want more gymnastic stuff, we can do it here in the podcast, or you can check it out on the symposium. So hope you have a wonderful week and day. And I hope that was helpful for you. Take care.